Well, yeah, what we're seeing now is the Piłsudski Square in the very heart of Warsaw.
Pododdziały, baczność! Pododdziały na prawo, patrz! Poczet flagowy. Do podniesienia flagi państwowej, marsz!
Now the flag will be raised.
Wystąpił poczet flagowy w składzie. Dowódca pocztu, major Radosław Kozuk. Flagę na maszt podniesie sierżant Stanisław Daszka. Asystuje porucznik Patryk Koryś.
The commander of the colored party is Major Radosław Kozuk. The flag will be hoisted by Sergeant Stanisław Daszka. He will be assisted by Lieutenant Patryk Koryś.
A już za chwilę na maszt zostanie podniesiona flaga Rzeczypospolitej.
And just a reminder, if you're joining us, these here are events in Warsaw. Just remember the start of World War II 80 years ago. Dignitaries, world leaders on hand for these commemorations. We're expecting speeches from the German and Polish presidents and the US vice president.
Z okazji 80. rocznicy wybuchu II wojny światowej flagę państwową podnieś!
was the Polish national
Pododdziały,
anthem.
baczność! Pododdziały na prawo, patrz! Oficer rozprowadzający dokonać zmiany wartowników na posterunku honorowym przed grobem nieznanego żołnierza. Zmiana, wystąp!
This is a military ceremony currently taking place in Warsaw to mark 80 years since the start of World War II when German Nazi forces invaded Poland. And you just briefly saw images there of the tomb of the unknown soldier. Wojciech, you were giving us the significance, remind us again of how important that site is for Poland.
Yes, well, as we said, this tomb of the unknown soldier, it is actually what we see there are the remainings, this very few bricks that were still there after the war. Those are the remainings of the Saxon Palace that we've talked about, this very distinctive, beautiful construction in pre-war Warsaw that was completely ruined after 45. As was actually almost the entire Warsaw. We saw some nice panorama view of the city with the modern skyline, with the skyscrapers. And when you look at this, you have to think of this expression that Warsaw is like a phoenix that grew up from ashes, because the city was almost totally destroyed after the war. We had this 1944 uprising in Warsaw, which was the huge military operation conducted by the Polish resistance, by the Polish Home Army against Germans, but it was lost, and Hitler then ordered to destroy Warsaw. So there was really not much left from this city when the war was over. So looking at this modern, big, lively, energetic city today, it's really also a wonder that we have that the city exists like this today.
Remarkable, isn't it? Here they are at the tomb of the unknown soldier, as you said, the last remains of the Saxon Palace.
It is interesting listening to Wojciech talking about the Warsaw Uprising of 1944 and the huge cost that was paid by the people who took part in that uprising. We should also mention, obviously, in that context, the Jewish ghetto uprising of 1943 that came earlier, that cost at least 13,000 lives. And then there was the Warsaw Uprising the next year, in the summer of that year, and cost maybe 200,000 lives. Many others, many tens of thousands of people were deported to concentration camps. And it is interesting in the context of the debate about resistance here in Germany, where we talk about the people who engaged in resistance here in Germany, be it the von Stauffenberg group or others, individuals or groups, but really, ultimately, it was only a handful of people. We're so very grateful that they were so courageous, that they risked their lives and in most instances paid the highest price. But in general, we talk about how futile it would have been to rise up against Nazi Germany because of its totalitarian control of society. And then you look at the figures on the Polish side, where so many tens of thousands of people really did, in huge, unbelievable adversity, take up the challenge and say, if we're going to go down here, we're going to go down courageously, we're going to go down in our own way, in our own time, making the decision ourselves. This is incomparable courage, and I have great understanding, I must say, for Polish people who talk about the uniqueness of the sacrifice and the courage that was shown. I think that's very much reflected in this ceremonial today.
Indeed.
I think that's part of what the vibe, to use a very modern word, is very much focused on that, on the sacrifice I was just outlining.
And you know, although it's 8 years now since the war has broke out, Poland is so happy and so proud that finally you're allowed to talk about it without any restrictions, any reservations, because after the war, after 45, as I said, when Poland was the part of the Eastern Bloc and under the Soviet influence, you were not allowed to talk about everything, of course. Also, the theme of the Warsaw Uprising was a kind of taboo theme because actually the Soviet army was there in Warsaw as well in 44, but they did not help the Polish resistance fighting against Germans. the Soviets did not really want that this resistance, this home army will get too strong, because they knew this could cause some troubles then after war, creating this state being totally dependent on Soviet Russia.
And I wonder, Wojciech, to what extent you would talk about, given what you're saying, that there was the communist period in the post-war times, and then there was the crumbling of communism and the establishment of capitalism in Poland too, learning to create a whole new economy, a whole new society, and now finally there is a little bit of breathing space that you've just been describing, and something that I think I would call normalization in Polish society.
Yes, we've had this very interesting years of transformation in Poland.
And it looks like the Polish president, to interrupt you, sorry, Wojciech, the Polish president Andrzej Duda is just beginning to hold a speech. Let's listen.
Our dearest defenders of the homeland.
Panie i panowie prezydenci,
Honorable Mesdames and Messieurs Presidents,
dostojni panie i panowie przewodniczący parlamentów,
esteemed presidents of the parliaments,
wielce szanowni państwo
distinguished
premierzy,
prime ministers,
z panią kanclerz Niemiec,
with Madam Chancellor of Germany,
szanowni państwo ministrowie,
distinguished ministers,
szanowni państwo posłowie, senatorowie,
distinguished deputies to the Polish parliament, distinguished senators,
szanowni panowie generałowie,
distinguished generals,
szanowne panie i panowie oficerowie,
distinguished officers,
podoficerowie, żołnierze,
non-commissioned officers and
wszyscy
soldiers,
dostojni przybyli goście,
all distinguished guests
mieszkańcy Warszawy,
gathered at this ceremony, inhabitants of Warsaw, dear
wszyscy
compatriots,
nasi przyjaciele i alianci.
all our friends and allies.
50, a jak liczyć
50,
trochę inaczej,
or if you calculate in a different way, almost 80 million people
tamten straszliwy konflikt zbrojny.
lost their lives during that horrible armed conflict which started 80 years ago.
80, jeżeli policzymy nie
80,
tylko wszystkich
if
tych
we
ludzi,
take into
którzy
account
zostali
not only
zabici,
all those people who were
zamordowani,
killed and murdered,
ale także
but
tych,
also
którzy
if we
pomarli
add to
na
that
skutek
number
wojny,
those who died
z głodu,
as a
z
result of
chorób,
war,
z
died
nędzy.
of starvation, of disease,
3%
and of misery.
ludności ówczesnego
3%
świata.
of the then population of the globe.
Patrząc na Europę,
If you look at
można
Europe,
byłoby powiedzieć,
one could say
wielkie
that
europejskie państwo,
that
jego ludność
equals
nagle
to a
zniknęła,
large
w
European
ciągu
state.
6
The
lat
population
zostawiła
of that state
pustą
suddenly
ziemię.
vanished during 6 years, and they
Trudno
left
sobie
an empty ground.
Do dzisiaj w ogóle wyobrazić.
It is hard to imagine
Ten
that
kataklizm
today.
dziejowy,
That cataclysm of
największy
history, the largest
i najbardziej
and
niosący straszliwe ofiary konflikt zbrojny
the armed
w
conflict
dotychczasowych
which
dziejach
brought
ludzkości.
the most disastrous consequences and victims in the history of
Pamiętamy.
mankind. We do remember. We are gathered here today.
Dziękuję
Thank you
wszystkim państwu naszym
to all of
dostojnym
you, ladies and
gościom z
gentlemen,
całego
to
świata
all the
za
honorable guests from around the
przyjęcie tych
world.
zaproszeń,
Thank
za
you for having
przybycie
accepted
do
the
Warszawy
invitation.
czasem
Thank you
na
for
drugą
coming to
stronę
Warsaw.
globu.
Sometimes you had to travel from the other
to,
side of the earth to be
żeby
here,
być tutaj razem,
to be here
po to,
together,
żeby pokazać światu, że
to
pamiętamy.
show to the world that we do remember.
Może młody,
A young
ktoś
person,
o
perhaps,
aroganckim podejściu do życia powie,
a
po co?
person with an arrogant attitude to life might
co
ask a
pamiętamy?
question, why? Why
Po co
do we
o tym
remember?
pamiętamy?
Why is it worth remembering about that?
Jest taka polska
There
piosenka,
is a Polish
bardzo
song,
lubiana, napisana
very popular
niedługo po zakończeniu
and
II
composed
wojny
shortly
światowej, w
after
której
the end
jest
of the
taki
Second World
fragment.
War. It's got a certain line in it. New children will be born,
Śmiać się będą,
and
że my
they will be smiling and laughing at us that we keep recollecting that misery and that time of the storm.
i będziemy
We do
pamiętać
remember, nevertheless, and we are going to remember out of gratitude.
wdzięczności dla wszystkich
Out of
tych,
gratitude for all those who
walczyli, z
were
wdzięczności dla
fighting,
wszystkich tych,
out of
którzy
gratitude for all those
oddali
who
swoje życie
gave their lives
dla wolnego świata,
for a free world,
dla obrony świata przed
to defend the world
hitlerowskim.
against Nazi totalitarianism, to defend the world against fascism, to defend the world against terror, to provide people with free lives, to make sure that people could decide their own fate, so that people could enjoy their luck. We pay tribute and we honor today all the victims of the Second World War. We bow to them, and with gratitude we kiss the hands of the veterans, of our wonderful defenders of the homeland, of those who are fighting for our freedom and yours on all fronts of the then world. Dear veterans, dear soldiers of our freedom, from the bottom of my heart, we thank you for that. We thank you wherever you are right now, wherever you live in the world today. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. However, there is also another reason, and that reason is the fact that humanity has probably not learned enough lessons stemming out of that horrible lesson, of that horrible experience, because still, in the world of today, not such a long time ago, we are facing ethnic cleansing, we are facing genocide. Now, in the contemporary times, we were seeing that not such a long time ago in the countries of the former Yugoslavia. And we witnessed that in Rwanda as well. And that is the reason why we keep remember to make sure that such suffering, such bestiality is never ever repeated again. And this is also the reason why we have to remember, and this is also the reason why we have to act by drawing conclusions of the past. But thirdly, there's also one more thing which needs to be said. For some nations, that war had a particular dimension which left a certain mark which is unerased. It's still visible in many places. This mark is still imprinted on many souls. This mark is also visible in a number of places, of unhealed architecture, of the beauty that was lost by the cities bombed during the war, which were not rebuilt afterwards according to the same standards, due to lack of money, due to lack of funds, and due to the wartime trauma. The nation to which I belong, the Polish nation, is precisely one of such nations. Here, in Poland, on the 1st of September 1939, the Second World War started. It started with an attack of Nazi Germany on the military Polish transit depot at Westerplatte. However, at the same time, it started with an attack carried out on a sleeping city. An attack on a city which did not defend itself and which was absolutely unprepared. It did not have any military troops in it. It did not have any military installations. There were just ordinary people sleeping there peacefully. It was a small city of Wieluń. It was totally bombed, and it was destroyed in 75% by a few aerial raids carried out precisely on the 1st of September 1939, starting from 4:45 a.m. 1,200 persons died instantly. And then, that war, that very war, which to us was a struggle all the time, that war in which never ever did we surrender as a nation. Although Poland vanished from the map, because first we were attacked by Nazi Germany and the Polish armed forces were pushed towards east, and then on the 17th of September we were treacherously attacked by the Soviet Union, as it later turned out an ally to Nazi Germany. And the Polish armed forces were surrendered, were flanked on both sides. Then we knew that alone we would not be able to face up to that challenge. Today, I don't not want to say that we were counting on the help of our allies back then. And although they declared war, we did not receive tangible help. If that happened, perhaps the history would have taken another turn. However, Poland vanished from the map, with many Polish soldiers becoming prisoners of war. They became prisoners of war of both the Nazis and the Soviets, especially the Soviet bondage is deeply imprinted on the memory of our nation, because the Soviets bestially murdered more than 22,000 Polish officers, prisoners of war. They killed them with a shot in the back of their heads, in Katyn and in other places. That was a horrendous hecatomb of the Polish intelligentsia. That was a horrific hecatomb for our entire nation. It was wiping out from the Polish structure of its best nation, of its best sons and daughters. I'm talking about the Polish structures in the broadest sense of the meaning, because I'm speaking here about the citizens of the Polish state. And to be precise, I'm talking about different nationalities: Poles, Jews, Ukrainians, Ruthenians. All of them were the officers of the Polish armed forces, and all of them were treated in the same way. All of them were bestially murdered. Many people, also the soldiers, were deported. They were deported deep into Russia, to Siberia, where they faced up dramatic conditions. They died in gulags, doing horrible, hard work, being tormented. It's hard to describe all of that today, but that was horrible indeed. And the country vanished. German occupation came. General government was put in place, and the entire nation was subjugated to an absolute terror. Nobody was sure when his time comes. There were roundups of normal, innocent people in the streets. People were packed on the vans and deported to concentration camps, to prisons. They were deported to forced labor in Germany. They were tormented. Families were torn apart. Children were taken away. Polish citizens of Jewish nationality were locked up in ghettos, and they were marked, they were branded. They were treated like non-humans, they were murdered, they were starved, and then they were subjugated to an absolute and mass extermination. First of all, in concentration camps, in annihilation camps, which Nazi Germans constructed. Also, on those lands which were ethnically Polish lands, which had the Polish state on them before the occupation came. The most well-known of those concentration camps was Auschwitz-Birkenau, the camp in which during the Second World War, 1,100,000 Jews were murdered from all over Europe, especially from Poland. The camp in which 140,000 Poles were murdered, 23,000 of Roma and Sinti, 20,000 of the prisoners of war of the Red Army, and 15,000 of people from many different nationalities who had been brought to that camp from a host of countries, from the entire Europe, which was then occupied by Germany. This is hard to imagine today. And we have been left with that. One can say that in this way, Germans humiliated us, Poles, because on our soil, they have left that machine of annihilation. But today, we are the depositaries of it. We take care of it so that it is a testimony to the whole world, so that the people, especially young ones, come and see what man could have done to another man, and what a totalitarian regime stands for, what cruelty stands for, and lack of respect for the fundamental rights of another human being and for their dignity. those German Nazi concentration camps, those marks of those horrible days of the Second World War have to last, and they are going to last. And another element of that memory is also our duty, the duty to take care of them and to encourage the young ones to go there and to take upon themselves that shocking experience, that horrendous experience. That is the visit in the concentration camp and seeing with one's own eyes that horrible history. However, this is a historical truth which is so crucially important and which liberates. But I want to stress once again that my nation, so heavily affected, has never surrendered. There was a Polish underground state. There were 360,000 soldiers of the Home Army of the Polish underground armed forces. They were active in conspiration. Despite of the occupation, there were partisans fighting in the forests. There were young people who were training, and those young people stood up here in Warsaw in 1945-44. They took up arms and they rose against the Germans in the Warsaw Uprising. Although they were ill-equipped, although many of them went to fight with bare hands, so much did they crave for revenge, for freedom, and for throwing away occupiers from here that they were ready to give their lives in order to attain that goal. They were crushed. Stalin stopped his troops at the line of the Vistula River, and he waited until Hitler bleeds the uprising. Warsaw went through horrors. Throughout 3 days in the Warsaw district of Wola, the criminals wearing SS uniforms murdered 50,000 people, 50,000 innocent civilians, people who were not armed, people who were not united in any kind of armed formations, people who were not active in armed underground movement. They were ordinary citizens of Warsaw. During the uprising, the total number of victims, civilian victims, was 200,000. And they are part of this nightmarish number of 80 million victims of the Second World War, including more than 50 million of civilian victims. As a nation, as a society, as citizens of Poland, we are part of those nightmarish numbers. It is also our grand heritage, but this also stands for our great trauma. Nevertheless, Poles fought on all fronts of the Second World War. The Poles got united as part of the Polish armed forces, who was fighting side by side with the Allies in the West. They defended the skies over Great Britain when the Germans were bombing London. They were fighting in the Battle of Britain. There were one of those few who did so much for so many. Wonderful Polish airmen. They showed their skills and their heroism, and we're always going to remember about them. Polish soldiers were fighting in the Battle of Monte Cassino. They captured that large fortress, the monastery, which was so bitterly defended by Germans. Then they liberated the cities in France, in the Netherlands, in Belgium. And they also captured Bremenhaven. And on the other side, they also fought together with the Red Army. The Poles from Far East proceeded with the Red Army. Those who had previously been deported to Siberia, they wanted to regain their Poland. They wanted to defeat Germany, and they were ready to do anything, to go to any lengths. They bled on the trail of the Eastern Front. They fought about Polish lands, for Polish lands. They were fighting for the city of Kołobrzeg, and then they were fighting for Berlin. And they had that grand privilege because on the Brandenburg Gate they were able to hoist Polish flag, the white and red flag. Then the fates of our soldiers took different turns. Many of them did not return to Poland because, unfortunately, we were not beneficiaries of that grand victory. We found ourselves under another occupation, of the Soviet occupation this time. And one can say that to a certain extent the Second World War, in the context of its political consequences, the political consequences of that 1st of September 1939 ended only in 1989. Hence, it lasted much longer than in other places around the globe. Because how can we talk about the end of the war and about a victory when you are not living in a truly free country, when you are not living in a truly sovereign country, when you are not living in a truly independent country, when you are not fully free? However, we thank our allies from the Free West, from behind the Atlantic Ocean, for having supported us in those difficult times. Thank you. That it is also thanks to their attitude and thanks to their aid and assistance, the people from Solidarity, the ground freedom movement, could prevail. That was a large satisfaction to us. That also thanks to our stubbornness, thanks to our struggle for freedom, the Berlin Wall fell later as well. That also Germans could experience their reunification as part of the grand community of the Free West, the community of democracies. Today, we are all members of the European Union. Today, we are together members of the North Atlantic Alliance. Today, we are together bound by all the best bonds of the free world. Once again, I bow to all the heroes of the Second World War, especially to the heroes, to my compatriots, to my fellow citizens, to those who fell and to those who survived, fighting for a free, sovereign and independent Poland, fighting for a free Europe, fighting for freedom, ours and yours. I bow to you and I pay homage to you. You are wonderful, and we thank you from the bottom of our hearts that you have joined us here today and that you give the testimony that it was worthwhile. It was worthwhile to stand up courageously and to fight for freedom and not to surrender, even in the bleakest circumstances. Honor and glory to the heroes. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, distinguished presidents. In conclusion, however, I would like to reopen the point that I mentioned before. I said that in the world today, unfortunately, we keep witnessing, despite of the entire progress of the civilization, despite of that horrible lesson from the past, we still witness the acts of ethnic cleansing, of mass murders, and last but not least, genocide. In recent times, we can see even in Europe, again, imperial trends coming back. We can see the attempts of borders being shifted in Europe by force. We are seeing other countries being invaded, their lands being taken away, and their citizens being kept in bondage. That very lesson should teach us one thing. Perhaps the Second World War would not have broken out in the first place if the states of the West had put up a decisive resistance against the Anschluss of Austria, if they stood up decisively against the imperial strivings of Hitler, his maniac visions, if they protested in a strong way against how Jews were treated in Germany before the Second World War, if the international community had defended very decisively and strongly Czechoslovakia, perhaps if all of that had happened, there would not have been an attack against Poland and the Second World War would not have broken out in the first place. If the leaders had been decisive and strong in the first place, if they had not been afraid of another war. Because as a result, that war did break out, and it was even more horrible than the First World War. And that is a grand lesson for us. The lesson for us as the leaders of Europe and the world today. This is a big lesson to us as those who are members of the North Atlantic Alliance, as those who are members of the European Union. We must not accept and do business as usual. When things like that happen, there have to be sanctions and strong steps have to be taken. It has to be visible that any military aggression would be met with an absolutely decisive, strong and powerful response. These are the challenges we are facing in the contemporary times. And that is why I would like to call on you, ladies and gentlemen, and to urge you. Business as usual, and turning a blind eye is not a silver bullet to keep the peace. It is a simple way to embolden those who are aggressive. It is a simple way to give a permission to perpetrate more attacks. Ladies and gentlemen, you know that this is happening. In 2008, there was Georgia. In 2014, Ukraine. And until today, we see borders being shifted, occupation, prisoners of war, military provocations. We have to be decisive. We must not accept this, because it is the responsibility we have in front of our societies and before the societies of Europe and the world to make sure that we never again see an armed aggression. So that drama, the tragedy of the Second World War, which the whole world experienced, is never repeated again. Honor and glory to the heroes of the Second World War. May the memory of the fallen live on. Long live free world. Long live the Euro-Atlantic bonds. Long live democracy. And long live freedom. Long live all the people of justice, peace and freedom. Thank you very much.
Serdecznie dziękujemy, panie prezydencie.
We thank the President of the Republic of Poland.
Szanowni państwo, przemówienie wygłosi prezydent Federalny Republiki Federalnej Niemiec, pan Frank-Walter Steinmeier.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Federal President of the Federal Republic of Germany, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, will now deliver an address.
Verehrter Staatspräsident Duda,
President
sehr
Duda,
geehrte Staatsgäste und Exzellenzen,
distinguished guests,
verehrte Warschauerinnen
Excellencies,
und Warschauer,
citizens of Warsaw,
verehrte Bürgerinnen und Bürger Polens.
people of Poland.
Es gibt keinen anderen Platz in Europa,
In no other square in Europe do I find it more difficult to speak, to address you all in my native language of German. Esteemed President Duda, I stand here humbly and gratefully. You have invited me to commemorate this anniversary with you and your fellow Poles. On this day, 80 years ago, my country, Germany, invaded its neighboring country of Poland, your homeland. My fellow Germans unleashed a horrific war that would cost more than 50 million people, among them millions of Polish citizens, their lives. This war was a German crime. The history of this place is testimony of that. On the very first day of the war, Germans bombarded Warsaw. They rampaged in this city for years. They razed entire districts to the ground. They deported the residents. They murdered men, women, and children. Poland, its culture, its cities, and its people. All living things were to be annihilated. The terror began in Wielun, a place whose fate is still unfamiliar to far too many people in my country. Esteemed President Duda, you and I paid tribute to the first victims of the German invasion in Wielun this morning. We often use the term immeasurable when we describe this war. We speak of the immeasurable suffering that Germany brought upon Europe. It is true that we cannot measure this suffering. But immeasurable does not mean that we are freed from the effort of sharing the victims' pain. No, the past is not over. On the contrary, the further back this war lies, the more important remembrance becomes. A war ends when arms fall silent, but its impact is a legacy that lasts generations. This legacy is a painful one. We Germans accept it, and we pass it on. As President of the Federal Republic of Germany, I, along with the Federal Chancellor, want to tell all Poles today that we will not forget. We will not forget the wounds that Germans inflicted on Poland and on the Polish people. We will not forget the suffering of Polish families, nor will we forget the courage of their resistance. We will never forget. The first German guest came to Poland over 1,000 years ago. His name was Otto, and he entered this country barefoot as a simple pilgrim in a gesture of peace and humility. I too stand barefoot today before the people of Poland as a human being, as a German, weighed down by a huge historical burden. Nothing can rewrite the past. Words cannot heal the pain. Deeds cannot bring back what was lost. I stand barefoot before you, but I am inspired by the spirit of reconciliation that Poland bestowed on us, the Germans. Over there is the cross where the Polish Pope John Paul II said in his homily on the eve of Pentecost 40 years ago, and I quote, "Let your spirit descend and renew the face of the earth, this earth," end of quote. This earth and this continent is what Poland renewed. Poland's spirit, your spirit of freedom, tore down the Iron Curtain. It is your spirit of reconciliation that gave us Germans the gift of a new beginning. It is in your spirit of renewal that we achieved a new and peaceful Europe together. And it is this spirit that should spread today from this square all over the world. Look at the tomb of the unknown soldier. Look at the Polish nation's heroism and indomitable love of freedom. They stand as a shining example of the many proud nations of Europe gathered here today in such great number. Look at the representatives of over 40 countries. Together, all of you whose ancestors fought and suffered in this war show today that the desire for a common future is stronger than the divisive rifts of the past. And look too at the fact that a German president is allowed to stand before you and to speak here on this square and on this day. That shows the living miracle of reconciliation. Reconciliation is a blessing that we Germans could not demand, and it is one that we want to live up to. You should measure us by the responsibility we take on. Europe is our responsibility. The united Europe is what saves us. It is the lesson of centuries of war, devastation, enmity, and hatred. Yes, this Europe saw people at their worst. Yet, it started anew and counted on their best. United Europe is built on humanism, the Enlightenment, freedom, justice, and the wealth of its languages and cultures. This Europe is and will remain a project of hope. I am well aware that my country has a special responsibility for this Europe. The fact that Germany, despite its history, was allowed to grow to new strength in Europe means that we Germans must do more for Europe. We must contribute more to European security. We must do more for Europe's prosperity. And also we must listen more for the sake of European cohesion. We Germans want to take on this responsibility, and we want to do so humbly. In view of our history, we Germans have every reason to be the happiest people in Europe. But we have no reason whatsoever to see ourselves as better Europeans. We are also responsible for the transatlantic partnership. On this anniversary, all of us look gratefully to the United States. The strength of its armies, combined with its Western and Eastern allies, defeated National Socialism. And the power of the United States' ideas and values, along with its foresight and generosity, paved the way for this continent to a new and a better future. Mr. Vice President, that is the greatness of the United States that we Europeans admire and are bound to. This United States opened the world's eyes to the irrepressible strength of freedom and democracy, and that was particularly the case for us Germans. A united Europe was always important to this United States. This United States wanted a genuine partnership and friendship with mutual respect. Today, it seems that much of this is no longer a given. So let us not forget what made us strong on both sides of the Atlantic. Let us preserve our common ground in this world, marked by change and fading certainties. We are very well aware of the fact that Europe must become stronger, and more self-confident. However, we also know that Europe should not be strong without the United States, let alone against the United States. Instead, Europe needs partners, and I am certain that the United States also needs partners in this world. So let us look after this partnership. Let us hold on to the conviction that the West is more than a point on the compass. Ladies and gentlemen, for us Germans, our responsibility also means this. Never again may nationalism resurge. Never again may Germans cry, Germany, Germany above all. Never again should nations rise over other nations, people over other people, races over other races. Never again should reason be lost. Never again should hatred and egoism be unleashed amongst the peoples of our world. Our fathers and mothers learned from the past. They sought reconciliation over the graves of their dead. Together, they found a new path to the future, the path of being good neighbors, the path of working together with rules for peace and legally enshrined rights for all. Dear partners and friends, let us uphold this spirit of reconciliation. Let us continue on the path paved by what unites us. As a German guest, I stand barefoot before you on this square. I look gratefully to the Polish people's fight for freedom. I bow my head in grief before the victims' pain. I ask for forgiveness for Germany's historical guilt. And I recognize our enduring responsibility.
Serdecznie dziękujemy, panie prezydencie.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Szanowni państwo, przemówienie wygłosi wiceprezydent Stanów Zjednoczonych Ameryki, pan Michael Richard Pence.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Vice President of the United States of America, Michael Richard Pence, will now deliver an address.
President Duda, President Steinmeier, other presidents, prime ministers, and heads of state, distinguished guests, and most of all, the noble citizens of Poland. It is an honor to be here on behalf of the President of the United States and all of the American people to mark the 80th anniversary of the outbreak of World War II. 2 years ago, President Donald Trump came to this very city and spoke of the remarkable bond between the American people and the people of Poland, saying in his words, "America loves Poland, and America loves the Polish people." And today, as Vice President of the United States, it's my great honor to stand here today on behalf of the American people, including nearly 10 million Polish Americans, in a Poland that is safe, strong, and free. As the President said that day in Krasinski Square, the story of Poland is the story of a people who never lost hope, who've never been broken, who have never, ever forgotten who they are. And today, in the heart of Warsaw, standing humbly before the tomb of the unknown soldier, we've gathered to bear witness to the courage of a great people, to the spirit of a great nation, and to the profound and lasting strength of a great civilization. While the hearts of every American are with our fellow citizens in the path of a massive storm, today we remember how the gathering storm of the 20th century broke into warfare and invasion, followed by unspeakable hardship and heroism of the Polish people. During the 5 decades of untold struggle and suffering that followed the outbreak of World War II, the Polish people never lost hope. You never gave in to despair, and you never let go of your 1,000-year history. In the years that followed this day, 80 years ago, your light shone in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. The character, faith, and determination of the Polish people made all the difference. It would, in time, turn shattering defeat into glorious victory. It is difficult for any of us who are not Poles to fathom the horrors that began here 80 years ago, on the 1st of September, 1939. Within weeks, the armies of Nazi Germany from the west and the communist Soviet Union from the east divided up this country into occupation zones. The maniacal Nazi leader issued the command for the physical destruction of the enemy and ordered the merciless and without compassion death of Polish men, women, and children. Those dual invasions marked the beginning of a conflict unlike anything the world had ever known before, and one we resolve here today the world will never know again. In just over 4 years, 1 in 5 Polish citizens would be murdered at the hands of an evil ideology bent on racial conquest and authoritarian rule. The Nazis systematically murdered 90% of Poland's more than 3 million Jews. Tens of thousands of brave patriots of the Polish resistance would be killed in the fight against the occupation of their homeland. Over 21,000 Polish sons and daughters were massacred at the hands of the communists in April 1940 in the Katyn forest and buried in mass graves. And right here in this city, more than 150,000 Polish men, women, and children gave their lives in just 9 weeks of the Warsaw Uprising. An uprising which was followed by the deliberate and total destruction of this city by German forces, while Soviet forces stood by and allowed the slaughter. Those who rose up died fighting to liberate these blood-stained streets from fascism, dictatorship, and the looming menace of communism. But as President Trump said 2 years ago, there is a courage and a strength deep in the Polish character that no one could destroy. And today, we remember the long roll call of Polish heroes who fought for freedom in those dark days. Their names and the memory of their heroism will be enshrined in the hearts of their people and freedom-loving people forever. The long and terrible war started here in Poland. But before long, that death struggle with totalitarianism involved the fates and compelled the extraordinary sacrifice of freedom-loving nations across the world. So today, we also remember the 16 million Americans who left the peace and comfort of their home to fight to liberate Europe. They stood against evil, and over 400,000 young American men, including thousands of Polish Americans, gave their last full measure of devotion for their country and the peoples of nations they did not know. Today, I remember my countrymen and their sacrifices with honor and gratitude. And today we remember the millions of brave and sturdy British citizens who served and sacrificed to save Europe, defend their sovereignty, their liberty, and their beloved kingdom. So too we recall the incredible patriots of the French resistance, the Dutch, the Danish, the Belgians, the Czechs, the Greeks, the Romanians, and so many other underground movements and freedom fighters who entered history as legends of courage. And they demonstrated a selflessness that will be remembered for the ages. But none fought with more valor or determination or righteous fury than the Poles. And in their decades-long struggle against tyranny, Poland proved itself a homeland of heroes. As we remember the war that began here on Polish soil 8 decades ago, we do well to pause and reflect on the causes of so great a conflagration. The fight against the twisted ideologies of Nazism and communism reflected the eternal struggle between right and wrong, good and evil. They were driven by an ancient and wicked urge to claim power by any means and impose their will to control the lives of ordinary men and women. All morality became socialist morality. Whatever served the power of the state became justified. Even murder on an unprecedented scale. But when we think of the depravity of totalitarianism, of the death squads, the concentration camps, the secret police, the state propaganda, the destruction of churches, and the endless hostility to people of faith, one cannot help but think of the words of another who lived under Soviet totalitarianism, the Russian dissident Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Pondering the ruinous times in which he lived, Solzhenitsyn reflected, and I quote, "If I were called upon to identify briefly the principal trait of the entire 20th century, I would be unable to find anything more precise than this. Men have forgotten God." Those who sought to remake the world by force did not have the last word, because there was something greater at work. Through the brutality of war and through 4 decades of communist rule, as President Trump said 2 years ago in this city, Poland and the other captive nations of Europe endured a campaign to demolish your freedom, your laws, your history, your identity, and your faith. Yet you never lost that spirit. Your oppressors tried to break you, but Poland could not be broken. And in June 1979, one of Poland's greatest sons returned home as Pope John Paul II. History records that in this very square, he preached that the Polish people could not understand their history or their future apart from the greatest source of their strength and goodness. The Holy Father's visit caused a revolution of conscience throughout the land. Within 16 months, Solidarity became the first officially recognized free trade union in the communist bloc. And the momentum of those 9 days would eventually lead to the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and the end of the Soviet Union in 1991. But on that day, in this place, Pope John Paul II said that man cannot understand who he is, nor what his true dignity is, nor what his vocation is, nor what his final end is, without Christ. And when the Holy Father spoke those words, the millions of Poles gathered here fearlessly spoke for their nation and their history. Lifting their voices, they sang, "We want God. We want God." And their voices echoed across this nation and around the world. A memorial cross to honor that historic moment stands before us today, just opposite the tomb of the unknown soldier. It is a symbol of Polish faith, but also of Polish hope and resolve. It is a permanent testimony to the belief of the Polish people that true solidarity among people and among nations is only possible when that solidarity is seen in the light of a providential Creator. Today we are gathered as friends, as allies from more than 40 countries, representatives of freedom-loving nations. Today, the fates of our people are linked by a shared love of freedom and self-determination. So let us on this day resolve that the words heard in this square that unraveled that long night of oppression, not just for the people of Poland, but all across Eastern Europe. Let us resolve that those words and truths that have sustained human freedom from the beginning will never be forgotten. America and Poland will continue to stand with all of our allies for our common defense. And America and Poland will also continue to call on our allies to live up to the promises that we've made to one another. For the American people and the Polish people know that a strong alliance of free, sovereign, and independent nations is the best defense of our freedoms, now and always. So thank you for the honor of representing our President and the American people on this historic occasion as we mark the 80th anniversary of the outbreak of World War II. Today we remember those that were lost. In Poland in their long twilight struggle, and all of those who sacrificed from my nation and nations represented here to win a victory for freedom. We remember those that were lost on this day, but we also do well to celebrate an enduring victim for freedom and the role that the people of Poland played by their strength and their example. As President Trump said here in Warsaw 2 years ago, America never gave up on the freedom and independence of the Polish people, and we never will. And on this occasion, if any should doubt that the destiny of mankind is freedom, let them look to Poland, to the courageous Polish people, and see for themselves the indomitable spirit, strength, and resilience of freedom-loving people standing on a foundation of faith. Through their decades-long struggle, their courage and faith shone forth. You proved again, here in Poland and for all the world, that though it may take decades, that where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. Having paid tribute to the past, we now look to the future. And with the inspiration, courage, and resolve of the Polish people, from this day forward, I can assure you that Poland, America, and all freedom-loving nations in the world will meet that future together. Thank you. God bless you. God bless Poland, and may God bless the United States of America.
Serdecznie dziękujemy, panie prezydencie.
Welcome back. You've been
Thank you very
watching
much,
commemorations
Mr.
in
Vice
Warsaw,
President.
marking the start of World War II 80 years ago. We've just seen speeches there from Polish President Andrzej Duda, German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier, and just now U.S. Vice President Mike Pence. We should say other world leaders, dignitaries are also on hand, including German Chancellor Angela Merkel. Poland suffered some of the worst atrocities of the war. Nearly 6 million Poles were killed, and that's something that was touched upon in those speeches. Duda recalling the suffering that Poland endured, and the German president saying the past is not behind us. Germany will remember the horrific suffering it brought upon Poland. And we heard as well the U.S. Vice President speaking of the special bond between the Polish and American people, the incredible strength and resilience of the Polish people. Now follows a military ceremony. There will be a ringing of the peace bell, as well as a wreath-laying ceremony at the tomb of the unknown soldier, which was referenced in those speeches. Our political correspondent, Peter Craven, also our correspondent from DW's Polish service, Wojciech Szymanski, in the studio with us, watching these very somber ceremonies today. Perhaps your thoughts on some of the words that we heard from those three men.
Well, I believe after having heard the address by the Polish President Andrzej Duda, I guess we can now understand why Vladimir Putin hasn't been really invited to Warsaw.
Indeed. We're hearing some more of the ceremony here. Let's listen in, and then we can comment a bit more on the speeches.
Pododdziały, baczność! Na ramię, broń! Do nogi, broń! Pododdziały, spocznij!
Szanowni Państwo, już za chwilę odbędzie się ceremonia uderzenia w dzwon. Pamięć i przestroga. To symboliczna i bardzo doniosła chwila. Po uderzeniu w dzwon szef delegacji przechodził będzie w miejsce ceremonii składania wieńca na płycie grobu nieznanego żołnierza.
Ladies and gentlemen, in a moment, the ceremony of ringing the remembrance and warning bell will take place. It's a symbolic and momentous event. After ringing the bell, the head of the delegation will move on to where the wreath-laying ceremony will then begin.
Pododdziały, baczność!
O rozpoczęcie tej ceremonii i uderzenie po raz pierwszy uprzejmie proszę prezydenta Rzeczypospolitej Polskiej, pana Andrzeja Dudę.
I will now ask the President of the Republic of Poland, Andrzej Duda, to begin the ceremony and ring the bell for the first time.
Prezydent Federalnej Republiki Federalnej Niemiec, Jego Ekscelencja pan Frank-Walter Steinmeier.
The Federal President of the Federal Republic of Germany, His Excellency Frank-Walter Steinmeier.
Wiceprezydent Stanów Zjednoczonych Ameryki, pan Michael Richard Pence.
The Vice President of the United States of America, Michael Richard Pence.
Prezydent Republiki Węgier, Jego Ekscelencja pan János Áder.
The President of the Republic of Hungary, His Excellency János Áder.
Prezydent Republiki Słowenii, Jego Ekscelencja pan Borut Pahor.
The President of the Republic of Slovenia, His Excellency Borut Pahor.
Prezydent Republiki Chorwacji, Jej Ekscelencja pani Kolinda Grabar-Kitarović.
The President of the Republic of Croatia, Her Excellency Kolinda Grabar-Kitarović.
Prezydent Republiki Islandii, Jego Ekscelencja pan Gundi Johannesson.
The President of the Republic of Iceland, His Excellency Gudni Johannesson.
Prezydent Republiki Estońskiej, Jej Ekscelencja pani Kersti Kaljulaid.
The President of the Republic of Estonia, Her Excellency Kersti Kaljulaid.
Prezydent Republiki Bułgarii, Jego Ekscelencja pan Rumen Radev.
The President of the Republic of Bulgaria, His Excellency Rumen Radev.
Prezydent Republiki Albanii, Jego Ekscelencja pan Ilir Meta.
The President of the Republic of Albania, His Excellency Ilir Meta.
Prezydent Czarnogóry, Jego Ekscelencja pan Milo Djukanovic.
The President of Montenegro, His Excellency Milo Djukanovic.
Prezydent Gruzji, Jej Ekscelencja pani Salome Zurabiszwili.
The President of Georgia, Her Excellency Salome Zurabiszwili.
Prezydent Republiki Malty, Jego Ekscelencja pan George Vella.
The President of the Republic of Malta, His Excellency George Vella.
So we're watching the ringing of the
Prezydent
peace bell.
Ukrainy, Jego Ekscelencja pan
More than 40
Volodymyr
countries
Zełenski.
here on hand for
The
these
President of
commemorations in
Ukraine,
Warsaw.
His Excellency Volodymyr
See here,
Zelensky.
As we hear the new leader of Ukraine here, Volodymyr Zelensky. And incidentally, this peace bell was actually cast just for these
Prezydent Republiki
commemorations,
Słowackiej, Jej Ekscelencja
not there
pani Zuzana
previously.
Czaputowa.
The President of the Slovak Republic, Her Excellency
And Peter and
Zuzana
Wojciech, as we watch
Czaputowa.
these ceremonies taking place, and again, we'll watch as the wreath-laying ceremony takes place in a moment as well at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. Perhaps you can share your thoughts on what we've seen so far and heard so far.
Well, if I might, I would like to immediately pick up on what Wojciech was saying, that we were asking ourselves a little bit earlier, we were speculating just a little bit about why Vladimir Putin hadn't been invited to today's ceremony.
Indeed.
And certainly that, for me, is headline material now that we know the answer, because certainly the speech by Andrzej Duda, the Polish president, was an in parts, I would call, an angry address. And Mike Pence's speech as well was also, in part at least, an attack on the Soviet Union, Soviet communism, and as he sees it, the invidious influence that it had when the communists were in power in Moscow. I thought just one line before I hand back to you, Wojciech, the one line from Andrzej Duda. I think all our eyebrows went to the roof when he talked about imperial trends in Europe. Yeah. And we were all wondering, we were thinking, well, he must mean Russia, but he was being very, very inexplicit. But then later he mentioned Georgia and Crimea and was talking about the threats to the liberty of nations in Europe in the future. Yes, so no wonder that Vladimir Putin would have been not just ill at ease if he did attended today, he would have been furious.
Yes, that's a really very hard address made by the Polish President Andrzej Duda. However, in Polish debate, those kind of words aren't really something new. He would address Russia very roughly, talking about Ukraine or talking about what happened in Georgia 2008. The previous Polish president, Lech Kaczyński, who died in this crash in Russia some years ago, he was also a very talking a lot about Georgia and calling for resistance in the West. However, President Andrzej Duda also said, he warned that too much appeasement policy may cause the opposite than peace. As he said, business as usual is not a silver bullet to keep the peace. So that's a clear address to NATO, to the Western allies by the Polish president. He didn't say it so clearly, but it was an appeal to not to let Russia do what it is doing in Eastern Europe, in Ukraine. It's a indirect appeal to spend more money on your defenses. That's what Mike Pence was also talking about, meaning, I believe, here Germany. We have Polish President Andrzej Duda saying maybe there wouldn't be the Second World War if Germany was or had been attacked, like in the 30s, at the end of the 30s. And directly saying, well, this may be some kind of similar situation right now, and we shouldn't be like looking what Russia is doing there. That's some call for action. Actually, I wouldn't like to, or yeah, we can imagine what action it could be, or yeah, it is a call for political action, of course.
Well, it was interesting. There was one moment when Frank-Walter Steinmeier almost appeared to look across to Mike Pence and said, we really must strengthen, reinforce the NATO partnership. And you could almost hear Mike Pence thinking, shall I stand up and say, are you going to walk the walk and not just talk the talk? Is this lip service to NATO or what? That would have been what Mike Pence was thinking at that moment, whether Germany would be willing to make what the US sees as a fuller commitment, financial commitment to the NATO budget.
Indeed. And interesting, the point that you made, Peter, that we heard the US Vice President not only touch on the Second World War, which broke out 80 years ago, but the more than 40 years of communist rule, of Soviet rule that Poland suffered under as well. And that was a central part of his speech as well, perhaps not entirely expected in the weight that we'd seen in the other speeches.
Yeah, and referring very much to sort of the if you will, the Christian spirit, which Mike Pence clearly believes, like many Poles clearly believe, was the essential force allowing them to battle against communism and to prevail against communism. It was a speech where, I mean, there was a sentence, nobody can understand history without Jesus, and there were several sentences like that. That would have been, very close to the heart of many Poles, but it's not necessarily the kind of thing you hear every day in political language here in Germany, for example.
Indeed, it certainly is not.
However, as you said, I think in Poland this kind of language in politics is usual. So I think Mike Pence knew where he's talking and to who he's talking there. Let me go back to one sentence of Mike Pence again. US and Poland will continue to call up to stay up for the promise that have been made to each other. This is clearly, in my opinion, this call to spend enough money for your defense if you are
2%
partners,
of GDP.
2% of your economic outcome, which Poland, for example, is doing, but Germany is not. That's why Washington is really angry about it, and President Donald Trump has many times very harshly criticized Germany for not paying enough for its defense. So this is a call to stay up for the promise to spend enough money and promise to help each other in case of danger in NATO.
But no promise today, in this address at least, of fresh deployments of US troops, either being redeployed from Germany to Poland or being deployed from, the greater US force to Poland. No promise of that. That is something that we had been looking out for.
Yeah, well, this is part of the actual debate between Poland and US. Poland is willing to have more American soldiers stationed in Poland. There are now about 4,500 American soldiers. Poland wishes to have more. This is, of course, not so easy because Russia would not be very happy with more American or NATO soldiers being in Poland. So there was I think this was not really an occasion to talk about such detailed things as sending 1,000 troops more to this base or this base in Poland. But there was one important sentence for Poland, I believe, coming from Mike Pence's mouth. USA will never give up on the independence of Poland. That's what Poles want to hear from American president or vice president.
Safe, strong and free was the promise.
Indeed, language that a lot of Poles they were applauding in the audience. And we should say that U.S. President Donald Trump did speak in Warsaw, which the vice president referenced many times. He spoke there 2 years ago and touched upon some of the same points of the strength and resilience of the Polish people, the special bond that the Polish and American people share. Our correspondent Simon Young is on the ground in Warsaw. He has been following this for us as well. Let's see if we can bring Simon into this discussion. Simon, we don't see you yet, but hopefully you can hear us. Give us your impression from being there on the ground, there you are, of what you have seen and experienced there and the general atmosphere of this commemoration today.
Yeah, Sumi, I can just about hear you, but perhaps you can hear in the background the church bells. We've had the ringing of the ceremonial bell here by all the representatives of the different nations. The church bells of Warsaw have been also ringing out to mark these ceremonies. I was going to say it's a solemn occasion, of course, but it's been a display of military pageantry. We've had the armed forces of Poland here showing their sort of marching and drill technique. We've also had a rather frightening multi-cannon salute, which nearly blew the foundations off this journalist's podium where I'm standing. And of course we've had those very interesting speeches which, as I think Peter and Wojciech were saying, have been more full of content or at least hints of politics than was expected. So Angela Merkel's been here observing it all in her usual calm, if not to say dispassionate way, but it is a solemn ceremony, but also with lots of pageantry and lots of interest.
Indeed, Simon, and we're seeing now, I think, the wreath-laying ceremony just getting underway there in Warsaw at the tomb of the unknown soldier. Let's listen to that.
Szanowni Państwo, zakończyła się ceremonia złożenia wieńca. Uprzejmie proszę szefów delegacji o powrót na trybunę honorową.
The wreath-laying ceremony has now concluded. I would ask the heads of the delegations to return to the grandstand.
Już za chwilę odbędzie się defilada.
The march past will begin shortly.
So this is essentially the conclusion of this part of the ceremonies that we've been seeing here in this Pilsudski Square in Warsaw. As we just heard the announcer say, the wreath-laying ceremony has concluded. There will be a military honorary escort leaving the square. Of course, the delegates, representatives from more than 40 countries as well, will leave the square. And Simon, if you can still hear us there, what is your sense from covering this in Poland, how important this ceremony has been to Poland, now 80 years, marking 80 years since the start of the World War II?
Yes, Sumi, I think it is very important to Poles to remember not just, of course, the start of World War II, but the many years of suffering that followed. It's the suffering and the wrongs done to Polish civilians, the destruction, the wanton destruction, you have to say, by Nazi Germany of many Polish cities that was, I think, supposed by the Polish authorities to be the centre of attention today. Of course, there are military veterans here who very proudly always turn out in Poland on these occasions in their uniforms, many of them very old indeed now, but they're treated with huge respect. There are several hundred members of the ordinary public who crowded around on this very hot day to stand in the sunshine and listen to the speeches and see the ceremonies. And of course, those speeches, as we've been saying, have gone beyond the pure historical context. They've also talked about the threats to European security, or indeed to democracy and the cooperation of nations today. So there have been lots of different aspects here, but I think it's very important to Poles to know that all the nations involved at the time, perhaps with the exception of Russia, which hasn't been invited to this event, that they're remembering and showing gratitude to what Poles did and the sacrifice that they endured during those many years of terror under the Nazis.
And Simon, maybe we can ask you as well about the significance of Germany taking part in an event like this, of having the German president, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, as a guest of honor. We did, of course, hear him earlier speak as well. And we were talking here in the studio a bit earlier about this culture of remembrance and perhaps paying more attention to what happened in Poland itself, that there is a sense that perhaps Germany could have done more in that sense as well.
Yeah, the importance of Germany being represented here at the highest level is great. And it's always difficult, of course, for a German leader to come here to the center of the Polish capital, a city that was very largely laid waste by the Nazis, who pretty well needlessly destroyed the city and deported its inhabitants. And as Frank-Walter Steinmeier, the German president, said, it's so difficult to stand here speaking German and asking for forgiveness, but it's something that has been done before by German leaders, and as he said, they will go on doing that because they recognize the need to show Poles, as to other nations that suffered, that there is a strong sense within Germany of the moral continuity between the previous German states and the Germans of today, different as they are. And I think Frank-Walter Steinmeier struck an excellent note of reconciliation. As he said, we can't draw a line under it. And he recognises that the responsibility goes on, and that's why German leaders, I think, will keep coming back on these occasions in spite of the difficulty and the pain to show that they know about the history and they care about the suffering that was caused.
All right, Simon, thank you so much for that insight there from Warsaw, where those ceremonies have been taking place today. And I want to pick up the discussion with both of you, Peter and Wojciech. Perhaps you can just comment on what Simon has been saying and also what your impressions were, again, of all three speeches.
Well, just before the speeches, I'd just like to go back a little bit to the beginning of the day and pick up on what Simon was saying. The day began in Wielund, the small town that came under aerial bombardment so savagely. And earlier this week, I was watching a piece on German TV where some of the survivors who still live in the city or live in the town, about 20 people, were being asked about, how they see the Germans today. And it was very interesting because there was a sort of a real equal divide between half of them were saying, well, look, these are different Germans in a different Germany, and I am prepared to talk, I'm prepared to listen, and I am prepared to forgive. The other half were, however, saying, these are Germans, and Germans will always be Germans, and I am not prepared to forgive. No matter how hard I try, I can't.
Very real wounds that still exist today.
Yeah, that's why I believe we shouldn't underestimate the symbolic power and significance of this speech by President Frank-Walter Steinmeier in this symbolic place on Piłsudski Square in Warsaw, saying clearly it was a German crime and we will never forget, and saying, I ask for forgiveness, I recognize our enduring responsibility. I believe as a Polish person, you can't really get enough of such words, even 80 years after the outbreak of the war.
And we will never forget in Polish.
That's what he said as well.
Yeah, it was quite a moving moment. Yeah.
Very much. We know these moments from the history. They've been there before, like Willy Brandt in 1970, falling on her knees in front of the monument for the ghetto uprising. So this is another part of this history of German leaders saying how sorry and how ashamed they are for what have happened.
Just quickly, insight from both of you. Does this usher in perhaps a new era in Polish-German relations and understanding of their relationship?
Well, maybe in what, as I said earlier, just my hunch as an observer was that the body language was very good and that the spirit of reconciliation was genuine. And also one thing that we were looking out for today was the question of reparations going to be raised today, which obviously would have been incendiary, and it wasn't.
Okay, Wojciech?
I don't expect a new era, but it was important what happened today, that we've heard those voices.
All right, thank you both, our correspondents here in the studio, Peter Craven and Wojciech Szymanski. Thank you for joining us as well for our special coverage of the 80th anniversary of the start of World War II, those commemorations in Warsaw. Thank you for watching DW.